Hi, this is Josh from Manhattan Edit Workshop wearing some silly headphones. You'll know why soon. Welcome to Sight, Sound, and Story. Tonight, we're going to be focusing less on the visual art that you see with your eyes and more on what's going on between your ears, exploring the magic of sound design in the Apple TV Plus hit series Franklin. We're joined by re-recording mixer Tom Fleischman, and along with him, sound designer Roy Garcia. And once again, moderating is going to be our old friend Woody Woodhall, CAS studio principal of Allied Post and all around good guy. As always, we'd like to thank our amazing storytelling sponsors, AJA, ACE, that's American Cinema Editors to You, as well as technology sponsors, Avid and Filmmaker U. And it wouldn't be a Sight, Sound, and Story if I didn't thank Jason Banky and Janet Dalton from Manhattan Edit Workshop. They handle all the heavy tech and logistical lifting, and then they leave the easy part to me. So sit back, pop on some headphones, and like these, and enjoy the show. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that. Today we are talking about the Apple TV show Franklin, and we are graced with the presence of two of the leading sound people on that show, also leading sound people in the industry. We have Tom Fleischman, who is a sound engineer, re-recording mixer. He's done probably close to a couple hundred films at this point for a long time. Won Academy Award in 2011 for Hugo. Wonderful, wonderful film. And other films of his that you may have seen: Silence of the Lambs, Aviator, Gangs of New York. The list goes on and on. And we also have Rui Garcia, who is an award-winning sound designer, composer, and music producer. And he also has done some films that you might have seen over the years: Midsommar, Roma, some of the TV work, Boardwalk Empire, and Vinyl. These guys have a bunch of awards between them, and these are the some of the best stuff out there. So obviously, when you're working on projects that big, that says something about them and their careers, that they're being called by the top directors to work on these shows. So very excited to have these guys with us here and talk about sound. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Rui. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Woody.
Absolutely. So before we get into the specifics of Franklin, which was a terrific program, and I'm looking forward to, we're not only going to talk about your work on it, but we're also going to take a look at some clips. I just wanted to take a step back for a second, because everybody's always interested how you get into any kind of aspect of filmmaking, and sound is thankfully still sort of a black art. Everybody can cut stuff on their laptop and all the rest of it, but even today, they sort of go, okay, now I've got the sound. What do I do? Thankfully for us. So let me start with you, Rui. So you started your career in Mexico, is that right?
Yep. I started first in music and then I veered towards film, which attracted me, I used to do everything there from location recording to writing scores to, it's a smaller industry, so you have to do everything. We would do commercials and industrial videos, the glamorous stuff, and but we'd also
well
do pop records, and so the sound team would do everything, from like the location recording to the post-production to the music and the song, of the movie or whatever. So, and
what's your main instrument, just out of curiosity?
There's a joke that every sound editor is a bass player. I started with bass, and then I moved to piano really fast, and so that's how I started. But then
I was just going to say, so you use Logic more for music and Pro Tools, or?
For music, we used to use Logic before it was even called Logic. I think it was not owned by Apple; it was another company, and then I started working on Pro Tools. Thank God. I actually, in school, I learned this in Clavier, and I graduated from like a program like 1 week before it went bankrupt. That was interesting. So that was how I learned digital editing.
I see. Well, yeah, we've all been through a lot of technological changes over the years. God knows. I know I started in film. I'm sure you guys did too. So Tom, you've been at this for a long time. I know you worked besides Dick.
Dick Borsek, yes.
Dick Vorsek, yeah, I mean, incredible stuff, and your family. You come from a filmmaking family, who and your mom has cut some of the most classic films out there as well. So, tell me a little bit about how you moved from that into sound.
Well, it started, I mean, my mother and father were both in the industry, and my mother was a very well-known film editor, and I spent a lot of time as a little kid visiting her in her cutting room. She even took me to mixes. She took me to the set of The Hustler when I was a little boy. So I kind of grew up like knowing, even by the time I was in high school, that I wanted to be in this business. And I went to NYU Film School, School of the Arts, for 1 year, my freshman year, and dropped out because, of course, I knew everything already, and they couldn't teach me anything. So I decided I was going to get a job, and I wanted to get a job in editing. I thought about acting, and of course directing. I knew nothing about sound, and so that summer I dropped out of college in 1970, and I was looking around for an editing job. I couldn't find anything, but one of my mother's assistants said, "You should call this guy. He just opened up a little sound shop." And I started working for him, when I was 19 years old, knowing nothing about sound. The first thing he did was give me a big box of 1/4-inch tapes with sound effects that he had gotten at an auction someplace, and said, "Listen to these tapes and go through them and figure out what's on each one and make a list of what's on every tape." And that's how I got started in sound, building a sound effects library, which wound up as, the Sound One sound effects library for many years. I sold sound effects to sound editors. We were all on analog then. This was all on 1/4-inch tape and 35, 16 mag. They would come in and with a list of effects that they needed for their films, and I would audition things for them. And they say, "Yeah, give me 300 feet of those birds," and I would transfer it off, and we would charge them $7.50 per effect, and 10 cents a foot for the stock.
Mm.
Then I started doing Foley. I recorded Foley and engineered it. And then I got another job offer at another studio where Dick Vorsek was working. It was his place, Trans Audio. And that was a real great opportunity. I was able to get into the union and eventually went back to Sound One, and, the rest is history.
Well, and Dick did some of the biggest films out there. In fact, didn't you mix with him on a feature that your mom cut, right? Reds.
Reds, and also on Harry and Son.
Oh, Harry and Son as well.
Yeah. And of course, I worked with her on Reds and with Dick. At that point, Dick was limited. He had some health problems. He'd had a heart attack, and his doctor had said no more overtime, which was a great opportunity for me because we were working with Warren Beatty, who came in at noon and wanted to work. And I would stay. Dick would leave at 6 o'clock, and I would stay and continue.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, both of you guys bring so much to the table, and it's clear from your backgrounds why that is. So speaking about Franklin specifically, I just wonder, had you guys worked together before? Now, the duties on this was really you were supervising sound editor and mixer, and Tom, you were mixer. I mean, I know that nowadays with Pro Tools and everything, it's sort of gray areas, but
we had worked together before on Boardwalk Empire and on vinyl. So
Great
We hadn't
shows.
worked side by side at the board before this, I don't think. Had we, Rui?
No, this is our first time sitting together at the board. Yeah.
And but Rui had prepared all the pre-dubs on both of those shows, effects pre-dubs. So I was quite familiar with Rui and his work, and happy to work with him. In the mix, Rui would prepare all the sound effects and sit with me, and he would control all the sound effects, and I would handle the dialogue and the music, and that's basically.
But Rui, you put together the sound edit with the team?
Yeah. I went from the spotting to the mix. I mean, it was a very, as Tommy just said, we had worked together, and it was a while ago, but usually TV schedules are so tight. I wasn't even able to be at the mix, in most of those, because we were preparing the next show, and we had like Boardwalk Empire was like a really crazy, demanding job, and so we would have to be like working, around the clock. So, but by the time Tommy would get the tracks, and then we would do go backs of things that were necessary, because they would give us, I mean, we would say this joke that we would get just like slugs of saying, Al Capone comes to town. So we're thinking, okay, this is going to be establishing shot. And then we would get like half an hour before the mix, we would get the final picture, and it would be Al Capone drives into town. They shoot out like half of Chicago. You see like every bullet hitting the wall. People come screaming. So we would have to, be doing that on the fly, and then sending it to the mix. Franklin was really fortunate because they agreed from the start to, which is Tim Pampaden, by the way, who was also a director and executive producer of Boardwalk, that we would finish all the editorial and then do the mix. So it actually allowed us to be more creative in that way and less reactive. And then I got lucky enough to be able to work with Tom for the first time, like sitting together, and learning from him. So that was really a fortunate part of this job.
So in terms of the process, is it, I mean, I know things have changed a lot for me nowadays. You used to, you were always running to catch up an episode a week before it aired, kind of thing. And the streamers have changed that, where you're delivering, a lot of times I'm delivering a whole season before it airs or whatever. So was that the situation here? You had delivered all of them before it hit the streamer?
Yeah, we did. We just had a little bit of overlap on a couple of episodes, but nothing major, and it also helped us to see the whole arc, that we saw this.
Yes.
Because sometimes you realize, oh, this is necessary for this thing that's going to happen. So you can go back and fix it in the first episode, that is, we've talked a lot about that, Tommy and I.
With a feature film, you have an opportunity as a mixer or the sound editor to see the whole film before you start and go over it all with the director. But on a series, it doesn't really work that way. You take it episode by episode. So, we might be able to see a rough cut or the final cut of the first couple episodes before we begin to mix, but we don't necessarily know what's going to happen at the end. So that's always an interesting way to work.
Well, and the whole paradigm is just endlessly shifting, of course. And we all got, during COVID, we all got sort of used to binging, a full season, after dinner kind of thing. But now it seems like they've gone back to, sort of rolling them out a week at a time. I know Hulu, Max, and Apple TV all do that. I know I was waiting for the episodes of Franklin to drop. I was watching it long before I knew I was going to be talking with you guys, so I'm excited to be able to do that. It's a terrific show. Sounds great. The stuff on Apple TV sounds just fantastic. I wish I could say that about all the stuff out there. But some of the shows just sound really, really terrific. The mixes are great, just so nice. And the mix on this is really beautiful. All the work, the blend of the Foley and the effects and the music, the score is just terrific. And also the dialogue is just really, really nicely mixed, which is not something you can say, unfortunately, today. It's really, I mean, I spend my day as a mixer, and I hate spending my night as a mixer, sitting there with the television.
Mhm.
It's like, and I just say to my wife every time, cue the music, boom, 12 dB hot, and you're like, don't wake up the kid, don't wake up the dog. That's a little annoying. So I didn't find that with Franklin. It's just a really elegant, if you could use that word for a mix. It really just sounds terrific. So
Thank you.
kudos, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, this show to me feels like it was probably very ADR, Walla, Foley heavy. There's just all these scenes with big scenes with people speaking foreign languages and such. So let's take a look at one of the scenes just to give everybody a sense if they have not yet had the opportunity to see the show. Rui, you had picked out the warm welcome scene, which is in the first episode, and it's sort of our introduction of Franklin into Paris. So let's take a look at that one.
Do they mean to attack us?
No, they mean to see me. They have it in their heads that I invented electricity. Who am I to dissuade them? Mesdames et messieurs, merci pour votre réception généreuse. Et je suis content d'être ici en Paris.
Suivez-moi, s'il vous plaît.
Et je suis impatient de rencontrer plus tard.
So let's talk about what prompted you to choose that particular scene, Rui, to introduce us to your work on the show.
Well, we were talking about group, right? And creating environments, and this is not an obvious thing, but it actually, we didn't have that much ADR in this show, considering that it was like for a period piece in which you usually have lots of ADR. The recordings were in pretty good shape, the original recordings, but we had a lot of group, right? I mean, it was like tons. Yeah. We had like more group and PFX, I think, than dialogue in every session.
That's what I meant, was group, because you have these large crowds. So
yeah.
Yes.
So the brief here, Tim is very into backgrounds. He's really, Tim Van Patten, really into the backgrounds and the people, and he writes it and he shoots it, and there's always characters doing things around. And we knew that this was French, so we did it all in France. Actually, we did it all remotely in France, and the location mixers recorded some group in LCR format, which was fantastic. And the brief here was Mick Jagger arrives with the Stones to town, right? So that was what they wanted. And we put in some concert crowds and applauses there, and it's just that the scene goes bigger and bigger and bigger later on until that door gets closed on the crowds that are like almost like storming them. But yeah, we did this in France, and we did it. They're very good recording this in France. We did it with a boom and with an LCR array, and we had, I don't know, like 14 people, I think, doing it. And we did it in a big Foley stage. And Ruth Hernandez and Marisa Littlefield, who were in this episode, the ADR editors, they did an amazing job, queuing it and recording it. And researching what would people say, and then Tommy made it work, and it's to me it sounds like natural, like I believe that I'm in there.
Well, that's the beauty, right? I mean, you guys are just such artists that, everybody just figures, turn on the camera and there's a mic there, right? You're done.
It doesn't really work that way, no.
It doesn't. So what were some of the challenges for you, Tom, in terms of mixing that scene?
Well, that scene, there wasn't that big of a challenge. I mean, a lot of that crowd, a lot of it was from production, actually.
No, I was curious about that. Yeah.
There was quite a bit of that was from production, which was augmented by all the material that Rui recorded, which gave it a little bit more texture because first of all, the production is in mono, and it's really not the sound recordist on the set is really trying to capture the principal dialogue. So whatever's going on around them is secondary, unless you get into a wide shot, like that wide shot of the street where you see the crowd cheering. I mean, I think that was a lot of that was production. They recorded that crowd live. In terms of the challenges for me, I mean, obviously the tracks were in good shape. The tracks were well recorded and there was good signal. Some of the accent, the French actors, when they were speaking English, that was pretty much the biggest challenge, I think, was making sure that the accents weren't unintelligible. That's always the challenge. I mean, as you said before, it's hard to watch television nowadays because you really need the subtitles. I think a lot of it has to do with the way that I was trained when I was mixing with Dvorak, and everything was mono, and it was all on an optical track, and the dynamic range was very limited. So that training has stuck with me through the transfer to digital. And, it's very important to me to make sure that the dialogue is intelligible. Obviously, there are times where you want to obscure things that are being said, but, the story is really is what the film is about. And the words carry the story for the most part, tells the story. So you have to hear that. And then it's a matter of making sure that everything works. I mean, the whole idea is to make it invisible, that no one should be, aware that that's a really cool sound effect. If that happens, you've really taken the audience out of the story. It's not. It's always good to have good sound effects, yeah, but they have to fit the picture and they have to blend in, and the track has to sound natural. So, if nobody notices what I'm doing to manipulate the sound, then I've succeeded. And if someone notices, the music's been faded down for that line of dialogue, if someone notices that and they realize the music's been faded, suddenly they're sort of taken out of the flow of the story, and they're thinking about the music. So it's really kind of sleight of hand in terms of how to deal with that. And that's also true for dialogue. I mean, actors used to be trained on the theater stage, and they would have to project to an audience, sitting outside of the stage. And now they've got these close mics, and the actors have a tendency to whisper and to mumble and to drop the end of their lines. And it's really, mixing dialogue is a chore, because you have to go through it line by line, word by word, make sure all the good thing is that we now have digital tools that allow us to do that, to raise a part of a syllable that's been swallowed. So, I spent a lot of time going through all the dialogue lines and making sure that it's all intelligible.
Well, terrific job. I mean, it's really an accomplishment. The entire series. I'm glad it's out there. It's just from a historical point of view. It's a story I don't think that people have heard. What was the genesis of it? Would Tim Van Patten was the showrunner, or I know he directed most of, if not all of them, right?
Yeah, he was the showrunner.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with Howard Porter, who was also, they have two other executive producers, and this is based on Stephanie Schiff.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
book, right?
the book, right?
The Great Improvisation, and it's a unknown period of Franklin, right? That people don't know that he lived so long, and talk about serenity and patience of like waiting all these years just to manipulate four like more powerful foreign countries to give all their money and resources to the revolution, right? To the independence.
Well, I never talk politics, but I'd love to. I wish we had people like that today in our positions of power. But anyway, I'm sorry, Tom, you were going to say something?
You think of Benjamin Franklin, and you think about electricity and flying kites and the Liberty Bell, and you don't really realize that he spent 8 years in France trying to win the war against Britain, against the king. And that's kind of an unknown part of history, and that's why I think this series is so good, is because it's telling this story about this guy who was one of our founding fathers, who the whole section of his life that we knew nothing about. So
yeah, and he's so celebrated. I mean, we think of him for so many different things, and a lot of that comes into the show, which is great. You know, his pamphlets and his books, and Eddie Marsan, who plays Adams, is just. I mean, I love that guy and everything. There was a show that he did. What was that? It was it. I forget what streamer it was on. It was called The Power.
Yeah.
Did you see one? I think it's called The Power or something like that. But it's very recent. It was just one of those bingeable things. And wow, he plays a gangster who's just like. When I saw him in this as Adams, I thought that was a real treat. Well, let's look at another scene here. Another one picked by you, Rui, the Madame Brion scene where she's playing the scene. I want to talk about that instrument. I want to talk about some of the music there and how you guys approach that scene.
Vous jouez divinement.
Il maestro Boccherini a été un bon professeur.
Ce morceau ne m'est pas familier.
Je viens de le composer.
Si facilement?
L'émotion fait naître l'idée, vous ne trouvez pas?
J'aimerais, mais moi, je dois beaucoup travailler pour être intelligent.
I think that is what a clever person would say.
Oh, I think Madame may be more clever than I.
Oh, no. I could never be so witty before so many people.
Is that why you play music that no one will hear?
But you have heard it, sir. Isn't that sufficient?
Benjamin Franklin, ma'am. Late of the printing trade from the city of Philadelphia.
Anne-Louise Brion de Jouy of Passy.
Je suis enchanté.
So that instrument that she's playing there, now I don't know anything about instruments from back in the day. Was that a harpsichord, or was some version of that sort of instrument?
No, it's a forte piano.
Forte piano, okay.
Yeah, not piano forte, which is what we know now. It's a forte. Yeah.
And so was that?
It is a plucked. It's not like a. I think
it's not a hammer instrument.
It's not a hammer instrument. It's a plucking instrument, but it's built like a piano.
Yeah.
Well, that set piece is gorgeous. Was that a real instrument there on set, or was that?
So this is like part of when you showed us the clips that you had, and I like this because this is not what you usually see in interviews or shows that we submit to the Academy. You know, you always see explosions and zombies running, you know, and rocket ships flying. And to me, these are like the most magical scenes of like period filmmaking because it looks so simple of having, as you said, somebody playing the piano, and then they stop playing and it stops playing, and then there's music in the background, right? And then somebody approaching, but you see a crowd in the back, and it's one of the most like complicated narratively. There's actually a lot of seduction and historical comment during that whole scene. But to do that, like the music team for this, which is Michael Hill and Missy Cohen, like the pianoforte, they had to research like the whole thing, right? Sorry, the forte piano, right? And when they were researching, they found like this woman, Rebecca Cypress is her name, who's like a dean in Rogers. And turns out she had done a whole record about Madame Brion, right? So that was like a really nice accident. But they hired her to play all the pieces. And then they found like a forte piano in some studio in Philly that's like, I don't know, 200 years old, but then you play it and it sounds tiny, so they have to work it out so that it works dramatically. And then you have a chamber orchestra in the background. That this is one of the beautiful things that Tommy mixes, is like you finish the piano and it just crossfades like musically into this like chamber that allows you to feel it and still hear the dialogue perfectly, right? With the crowd and the people and these like high heels, like of everybody's wearing heels in that time. But to do that, they had to go to Belgrade to record it with the chamber arrangers to do this background music. And it's all for like a few seconds, right? Of this beautiful moment, right? It's like the sets that you see. And
Well, yeah, the mix there is beautiful, and the diegetic music in the far back where they're dancing is fantastic. It's, like you said, it just sort of wafts in when she stops playing. Franklin walks toward her, and then we see behind him in sort of a deep focus, you know, there's a whole big party going on, and they got a whole band jamming back there.
Actually, the head of that scene, we come through that room where the
Yeah.
band is playing and they're dancing, and he walks through the middle room, and it was a matter of you had to begin to hear the forte piano and lower the band that was playing and make a blend, and eventually we get to where this clip started, where with the piano was playing, we see her playing the piano, and then we see him come in from outside. And yeah, it was a matter of perspectizing that music, you know, sonically, so that it played with what we were seeing, and you don't really think about it. Hopefully, you're involved in what's going on between the two characters. That's where the scene is. It's the conversation they're having, and that music can't be distracting, but it has to be there. And it has to be there in such a way that it plays naturally and realistically. And that's the challenge there.
Yeah, well, it worked. And, you know, the thing is that, you know, again, it goes back to, you know, somebody who doesn't know what we do for a living. It's just, if, you know, they often call picture editing the invisible art, but really sound is the invisible art. Because if anybody hears anything that you do, whether it's ADR or, you know, a bad, you know, a wrongly blended piece of Foley or whatever, it's like, oh, what, huh? You know, it's like, you know, I teach sound, and I often talk about room tone, and it's like you know, it's one of those things that people wouldn't know about, but they would know it wasn't there. Like they would say, yeah, there's something's wrong. You know, they might not be able to pinpoint it and say, wow, that's fake dialogue, that's all ADR or whatever, but they'll know that something's not right because we're so sophisticated. You know, audiences today are so sophisticated, And and as you mentioned, Rui, the work that you guys have done on this show is of such a subtle nature, that I think people might not really understand the technique and the thinking that goes involved in pulling a scene off, a simple scene like this, where it's just a discussion between two characters, when the reality is there's this entire party going on, and there's another band, and there's this instrument, and again, hats off to you guys in terms of doing that work. Certainly as technology has changed, it's allowed us a lot more ability to do things than if we were pulling a mag on some kind of gang sync with a squawk box. Where's that cane tap? There's a lot of cane taps in this show, a lot of foot taps. In fact, we're going to look at a scene in a second where there's a lot of that going on. But I'm just curious, in terms of the mix, was this an Atmos mix?
Yes. Well, home Atmos.
Yeah.
There's two versions of Atmos.
Yeah.
For
Mm-hmm.
home streaming, and the other is for theatrical presentation.
Right.
The differences are minimal, really. But yes, it was done in Atmos. But basically, the way that I like to use Atmos is with ambiances and music. I mean, that's sort of unless there's something in the image that causes you to want to move something across the screen or front to back, or you can't just do that because you can. There has to be a reason for it. It's got to be justified by the story and by what we're seeing on the image. So mixing in Atmos, particularly for television, is more of a sort of surrounding the audience with the atmosphere of the place, with some of that group ADR that you can move around. It's not mono. Those kind of things. Just atmospheric tones and music also we get the music broken down into stems so that we have control over different parts of the orchestra. So you can take like a synth pad or something, and that can be spread back into the wings. That's very effective. You don't really want to put lead instruments back there, though, because you don't want the audience to turn away from the screen for any reason. The very first Atmos film I saw, I sat down in the theater and the lights went down and the film started, and some jerk behind me was like listening to his cell phone or something. And I turned around to tell him to shut up, and then I realized it's part of the track. And it was a radio voice that was panned to the back left. And it just made me turn around, and it totally distracted me from it was the opening of the movie. What was otherwise a pretty good movie was kind of ruined at that moment. So if as a mixer, I'm always mindful of never ever doing anything to distract the audience. And as you said, something is missing that should be there, that's a distraction. Something's there that doesn't make sense, that shouldn't, and some kind of noise that makes no sense is a distraction. Something's out of sync. That's the kind of thing that we always have to be on the lookout for.
Well, and I think that Atmos has the opportunity to also pull you out, just like you had mentioned. It pulled you right out of the film. I do think, though, that a lot of things sound better, and I'm wondering if it's just that because things are mixed in Atmos and then down mixed, that the down mix that you're hearing is just a better down mix than what used to happen with surround. I don't know about that, but anyway, did you have a comment there, Rui?
That's a really good question what you said, because it's always what we hear in the studio, and there's always the question, how will this sound, especially if you're working on an Apple show, how will this sound in an iPad, so, and you're working now with people remotely, so they're like, we make sure that everybody have the same headphones, and but as Tommy said, this is a period piece, so we want it to be the most important immersive part of a movie, as Tommy said, is the story and the emotional content, right? So you want to use the tools if it helps with that, not to take away from it. And what we did very closely was like matching ambiances, like reverbs, right? We because it's a period piece and it's tricky to do distance, when you're inside, it's easier than when you're outside. So we use a lot of atmospheres. Sorry for the redundance there, but that we panned. It was like a lot of tones for the inside and echoes, but it's nothing that will make you turn around unless there's a couple of places, right? So when they're in the theater, do you actually want people to turn around? Because a voice comes from the side and surprises everybody, So then it's a great tool, right? Because then the camera is moving and you're moving with the camera and it feels realistic. And but we played more with that, with like echoes, and there's a couple of scenes that we did pan things around, like the fireworks scenes. There's that is fun to feel, and you'll hear if you have binaural headphones, or the Apple headphones have that, or if you have an Atmos system, you'll hear things go up and down, right? Or the war scene, there's actually no dialogue there, so it's like you just hear like and it's a point of view change, so you hear things around you, like the scream of soldiers walking around you, because it's a POV shot, so it's everybody's around you. That works pretty well.
Right. Well, great. Let's take a look at another clip here. Let's look at the Whitehall Palace clip. So now we're sort of deeper into the story, and now they're debating who this Franklin guy is. They know who he is, but what he's putting forth.
So this is actually a flashback to
thank you.
To him. Yeah, this is a flashback for Franklin being prosecuted in England for treason.
Dr. Franklin is nothing less than the first mover and prime conductor, the inventor and leading member of a secret cabal designed for the purposes of keeping up a spirit of clamor and discontent in our American colonies. The good doctor comes before the King's Privy Council today as an agent of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He bears a humble petition from that august assembly seeking the removal of the royal governor. For the sake of peace, he says. I call it a funny sort of peace that stains the waters of Boston Harbor with 10,000 pounds of East India tea. I'll give you this scurrilous article in the pages of the Public Advertiser. Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one. The article is signed Q.E.D. Quod erat demonstrandum. Thus it is proved. As you can see, Dr. Franklin is truly a man of letters.
Great scene, and I'm sure an awful lot of time was spent on that particular scene. Why don't you talk about why you chose that, Tom?
Well, I chose that clip as sort of a demo of what can be done with group ADR, because a lot of that crowd stuff was done as group, particularly the specifics, and obviously trying to create the atmosphere of that huge room and all those people. And, the actors were mic'd very closely and their voices were very dry.
In that giant room.
in that huge room. I mean, he had Mike close, and his voice, it was very dry. So I had to create the space around him in terms of the dialogue, and make it play with, all of this. There was production crowd there as well. There's some wild tracks that they had recorded of the crowd reacting, and that was sweetened with this terrific group ADR. Specific things, specific people that you see. We put something in for them
in the background. Yeah,
each one of them. Yeah, and so we did spend a fair amount of time on that scene. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of Foley going on in there too, Rui, isn't there?
Oh yes, and the group there actually we recorded in England for that scene.
They're pounding they're pounding like canes and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Canes and feet and papers and fans. I mean, there's a whole lot. I'm sure you had a bunch of tracks just on that.
Did they have fans? They have fans, and at the end of the scene, it's funny because one wishes for that level of discourse in Congress nowadays, but I mean, the most violent thing is throwing papers at them, so it's like you have this huge crowd and you actually have to hear the pieces of paper hitting them. But if you notice at the beginning, that's what Tim does. Like he shows them with the papers in their hands. So we make a point of like featuring it because that's what at the end, and there's of course a whole parable of paper with Franklin and the power of words, and the Foley team is Joe Caron Audio did the Foley, and they did a great job, but it was very specific about the canes hitting. They're sitting on these wooden benches, so you can hear the creaking of the benches and all that. We have, and this is a thing for sound effects editor out there, because I learned that through working with Tommy in Boardwalk Empire for like 5 years. It's like, don't just put like 10 sounds one over another, which is like what sound effects editors tend to do at the beginning, is just choose like a precise thing that you can fit in between the words. So sometimes you want to feel something, just put one creak in between words so that the mixer is not like, how the hell do I make this understandable when you're putting like layers of room tone and crowds? And so it's more about precision and rhythm, right? And a lot of air, what Tommy did with the echoes, and how you go closer and you feel the echo like kind of go away. So you already feel it and buy it. I think that's a great choice, Tom. It's a beautiful sounding scene.
Well, I think probably a lot of it when you get to the mix stage is, also pulling things out as much as all the layers of things that you've got there. Now let's be specific. And I see a guy with a cane. Let me hear that cane. I see a guy walking, we can hear the perspective as he's walking around that room closer to the camera, those kinds of things, which, everybody takes for granted because, I mean, you guys are doing a very naturalistic sort of sounding thing. And so obviously if you did something odd, that would pull the audience out, right? But, it's just so beautifully blended that, audiences, of course, just take for granted that, they just threw a camera out there and boom, there you go. You're done, right?
Hang a microphone, that's it, right?
What's that?
Just hang a microphone in the camera and everything the music is there and it's everything.
That's it. Yeah. It's funny when I talk to students sometimes, I have to, it used to be I had to remind them, but now I have to tell them, movies were mono for a very, very long time. Some of the classic movies that you could ever think of were mono films, because it's like, where would you put this in the Atmos, and how would you use the height channels? And it's like, you would use the height channels if you had something up there, right?
My first Oscar nomination was for Reds, which was a real monumental task. That was a big, epic film. And it's in mono. And it was the last mono mix that I ever did. there you go. Everything up to there, I'd mixed three or four films, and always a mono.
Yeah. Well, great. Let's take a look at the I can't read my writing here. Advantages scene, which is in episode number 5.
Do you really think he was taken in by your sudden show of infirmity?
Your notion of diplomacy will be our undoing.
America cannot suffer any more of this slow, silent, imperceptible creeping. We must show spirit in our application, a bold push, a show of industry.
There is no word in French for industry. The art here is to achieve much by appearing to achieve little.
An art which you seem to have mastered.
While I remain above ground, I will endeavor to please this court, to procure what advantages I can.
We did not throw off the chains of one tyrant to put on those of another. Count Vergine is not our friend.
No, but I rather like him anyway.
One of the things about this show that is so striking to me is just it's so beautifully directed. I mean, the way it's staged, the camera work. Today, it seems like so many pictures are just cut, and sort of losing the whole power of what the image can do without, and the actors. I mean, here's a scene with two guys sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum, and the scene just shows that, right? He's here, and the camera, we don't have to go to a single of him and a single of him back and forth, over the shoulder, this, that, or that. We just see that shot, and it just shows us right there without any fuss. I mean, of course, that's just the picture. What you guys do is a very different deal, but just on the picture end and from the directing point of view, it's just, and the whole film is like that. In each of the scenes that we've seen, there's just a real trust that the story can be told in very simple images. Now you guys have to fill all that out, of course. I mean, that scene was filled with, the coach and all the footsteps of all the people and the chatter and all the rest of it, which again is just beautifully blended. So because our focus is on these two men and this distance between them, which is just so beautifully captured there. I just wonder if you want to talk about that for a second.
Well, from my perspective, yes, all of that atmosphere, all of the activity and the footsteps and all the people walking around and the voices, all had to be put in perspective and not interfere with what these guys were talking about. The important thing was their dialogue. So all of that has to be there, but it can't be distracting. And then the other element is the music, which is barely perceptible in the beginning and grows during that conversation. It's getting, it's coming up very, very slowly. And just with that clip cut off, and then it kind of explodes into a little bit of a montage and becomes more of a musical sequence. But to get into that, you can't just do that abruptly. I guess you could, but Tim chose that, we wanted to sort of introduce that music slowly so that it didn't take the audience's attention away from the conflict between these two characters. So,
any thoughts here, Rui?
Yeah, I think, Woody, that you nailed it with your commentary about filmmaking, because when I first saw this scene, I was like, you don't see this on TV, right? When you have discussions about the two main antagonists in this case, it's close up of one face, close up to the other face, and maybe establishing shot if you're lucky, right? Because it's also not affordable to have. Here they went, and it's a real location, right? And that's when directors walk the walk and talk the talk. He wanted to have that. And I literally asked him, how did you get away with this, right? He said, I just shot this because I wanted to shoot it like that with the characters far away and to get closer to them, expecting the studio to the next day when they saw the dailies to like yell at me and ask me to do close-ups, but they never did, so I left it how I wanted. And you were saying about Apple, and it's like when they actually support filmmakers and their vision, it's amazing. But also Tim gave us time to do this, because we had to actually, to make this work, you actually have to have time to sit down and it's like, hey, Tom, what do we do here? What do we put? Usually don't have time to do that. You're just like making it work as you go. So there was conversations about that. And he had like some people fixing the wall of the, on the side, and then you have the people walking by, but the dialogue is edited in a way that you can have that, and it's shot very precisely. So that's directing. You can't do that at the mix. It has to be planned.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like that. Like you see Antonioni movies in which a boss comes by and you don't hear the word that you don't have to hear, but it has to be planned. And here's with all this texture, and I think it's a great moment that makes you lean in and want to hear what the characters do. It's not obvious, it's not narrated. You actually do the work as an audience to find out what these people are talking about. And then you hear the people they're talking about right around them, walking by, and it's perfectly staged. So here we're just able to like polish it a little bit. But if it's not planned from the beginning, this is impossible to do in post-production.
Yeah, I mean, so often it just seems like, we got to go back to old filmmaking 101. Let's get our establishing, let's get our two close-ups, let's get our over the shoulders, and then we're just going to hack this thing together. And it's so nice when you see that someone has spent a little time thinking about, because obviously directing is a lot more than that. It's, setting a scene and creating a mood and implying things. And that scene, just the way it's staged, shows you two men who are very far apart, even though they're sort of standing next to each other. And just to hold on that just says something about the confidence that the director has to make a choice like that. So, and this series is filled with that. I hope you guys get the recognition for it that it deserves. I hope everybody does. It's quiet shows like this typically don't, because people take for granted that it's,
Nothing special about
little
it.
Foley, little ADR. Come on, man. It's, and it's like, well, it is a little more than that. Because the flashy stuff and the explosions and all the the nameless superhero movies, which I don't know if you guys work on those, so I certainly don't mean to denigrate anything like that, but this is not my kind of thing. Put it like that. Let's take a look. One last clip here of Chess Master, which is near the end of the series.
Non. Comment? Non, rien. Qui es-tu? Votre humble serviteur, monsieur le comte. Tu connais quelque chose aux échecs? Oui, un peu. Évidemment que non. Et alors? Qu'est-ce que tu suggères? Non mais... Votre pion. Déplace. Chut, chut, chut. Mais pion.
Just out of curiosity, do you guys, either of you happen to speak French?
No. Well,
I speak.
Really
High school
probably.
French?
Yeah, my French teacher in school used to say to me, "Incroyable, Monsieur Fleischman, zero total."
Which translates to?
Unbelievable, Mr. Fleischman. You're a total zero.
Oh, nice. Mine was learn English first. You speak a little, Rui?
Yeah, I speak. It was very useful for this, right? Because yeah, we were back and forth. What is he saying here? And with the group recordings and all that. Yeah. So thankfully, I speak a little French. Yeah.
Did you need someone in the Bay with you at times to sort of
No.
suss things out, or no? You had a
No,
pretty good sense of that.
this was already sussed out by the time it got to us.
That's true. Of
They
course.
had somebody in the team in the editing during the picture cut that was very fluent with French.
I see.
And he was there. Like when we were spotting and during the picture side, you know, from where I was sending them stuff, there were a lot of questions and but yeah.
So let's talk about mixing that scene, Tom. Lot going on. Again, very subtle. People wouldn't pick up on what's going on, but there is a lot of business happening there.
Yeah, I mean, I find that you know, people think that big action scenes are hard to mix, and they're really not, because they kind of mix themselves. Everything is pretty obvious what needs to play, but the hardest kind of mixing is you know, a quiet scene, quiet conversation between two people with not a lot going on, because there's nowhere to hide anything. In this scene, obviously, we had music, and there was some crowd walla, and then there was individual, you know, group ADR voices that would fill in for the people we were seeing. And that, you know, the tension there was in the music and in the sound of the chess pieces being moved. That's where the, you know, sort of the suspense was happening. This was the brother of the king who was playing chess, and you know, Temple's trying to impress him and sort of make his way into that circle. He's a very ambitious young man, and you know, he wants to be part of the bourgeoisie. You know, obviously the music played a big part of that as well, and it's just a balancing of how do you play, you know, how do you place all those little voices, you know. There is a surround element to that scene that was fun to mix. You know, it's a lot of fun putting all that stuff together.
Any thoughts?
I find that the final mix, where you're putting all these, you've been working for a couple of weeks already, you know, matching ADR and matching dialogue and raising syllables and doing all this prep work, and finally you get to the final mix and you get to put it all together, and it's really an enjoyable process for me. That's my favorite part, is at the end, you know, figuring out how to make it all play so that the audience will be in the scene and not be thinking about, not be distracted by anything that takes them out of the story.
Well, you guys, you know, you've worked on some big shows, so I imagine you've got a little bit of experience. You know, I always tell people the best directors out there understand sound. You know, they're you know, and of course at this point in both of your careers, you know, you guys are working on, you know, the biggest of the big stuff out there. So these guys are also extremely experienced, not first-time filmmakers who are like, oh, help me, can you fix it? And you're like, you know, there's more to this process than just fixing your sound. You know, we're hoping to tell your story with sound too. So we're going to wrap this up, but any last thoughts? Rui, do you have any last thoughts about the show, about sound, about anything?
Well, in this scene in particular, was like we didn't have a French expert, but we had a chess expert, and so it was really great. I mean, part I think of how that scene works is because it can be quiet, because quiet things are making the biggest sounds. You know, here, as Tommy said, the tension is between the music, but that's very subtle in the back. But then the actual hitting of every chess piece. And Tommy, who's a chess player, who had like a chess going on through the whole mix with Missy, our music editor, was like, wait, that's not the way that hit should sound, when he's like taking the rook there. So we were very careful with that and just making space around that. That's like a secret of making silent things work. But in general, with the whole show, it was a really fun experience. It was not tense. They gave us time, not as much time as we want always, but they gave us actual time, and they trusted us. They didn't come every day to hear how it was going, in which you just spend time just playing back instead of like mixing, which is like there'll be less notes if they actually let us mix the show, before they hear it. And there was a lot of communication from the spotting, from, as you said, it's like you can read in the script if it's going to sound good. That has been my experience. Like everybody wants, I want to sound like, like an Altman movie with people talking over each other. It's like, well, not everybody can do that, right? It has to be written that way and shot that way. And in this case, from the scripts, it was planned, and there's a lot of thought into it, and everybody in the crew, the picture editors, the producers, the directors, they were really supportive, and we had an amazing crew, and they let us do our work, and we had conversations. Sometimes it's more important to have conversations than to have to have a lot of sound effects or computers and stuff. It's more about that. So that I'm very grateful, and I'm really happy that for after working, I don't know how many years we've been doing shows together, Tom, and it's the first time we sit together in the board. So it was a very learning experience for me, and I feel like a big privilege for that.
Yep. I hope people watch the show. I mean, I think it's really an interesting show, and it's well acted, it's well written, it's an interesting story, and it's fun. And particularly for, now at this particular moment in our history when democracy is on the line, I think it's important that people see how it all started. So.
For sure. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for taking the time talking about your work. I really appreciate that. I agree. I want people to go out there and watch this show. It's a terrific show, and it's an important show for people to, as you said, know what's going on out there, or what happened in the past. And that, I keep telling people that younger people today, and when I'm saying younger, I mean even 30s, really 30s, 40s, don't really have an understanding that this is not the way things go. This is a very unusual and difficult time, and it's important that people are awake. But anyway, we don't talk politics, we talk sound. So thank you guys so much for taking the time, and I hope for all of us who love movies that you guys do sit at the board together more often. You guys are the sort of the representatives of the New York sound. Certainly you, Tom, been there forever, and we really appreciate that. You get to do such great shows, and I'm looking forward to whatever is coming next. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. Thank you for listening.
Thanks again for tuning into Sight, Sound, and Story, everybody. Join us on June 26th when we talk with the editors of The Bear, and visit museshop.com for more information on how to sign up. One more shout out to sponsors AJA, ACE, American Cinema Editors, Avid, Filmmaker U, Jason Banky, Janet Dalton from Manhattan at Workshop, and most importantly, to viewers like you. We could not do it without you, and thank you very, very much for tuning in. Have a great night.
I got into sound designing at a point when things were just developing. I was really fascinated by the idea that dialogue, effects, and music were all components of the soundtrack to a film, which had never occurred to me before. What gets me excited is coming up with sound ideas that do match picture, but also is not just the equivalent of what you're seeing on screen. I'm Eugene Garrity, and this is my course on sound design.